Thanks very much indeed, Nicholas, and a huge thank you to Capital Link as well for putting on this afternoon. Look, I think it's fair to say we've had a fantastic day. Last panel of the day, and certainly by no means a weak panel at all. It's like a sort of a who's who of shipping that we have with us this afternoon. So first things first, my name's Andy McKeran. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Lloyds Register, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Sveinung Støhle, who's the Deputy CEO of Angelicoussis Group, George Economou, who's the founder of TMS Group, Gary Vogel, who's the CEO of Eagle Bulk Shipping. We've then got Carl-Johan Hagman, who's the President and CEO of NYK Group Europe. And we've also got Lars Barstad, who's the CEO of Frontline. So chaps, as we kick off, it's a question for everybody. We've heard all day around decarbonisation being one of the biggest challenges that we clearly have facing us in the maritime industry today. And certainly with IMO now being expected to make revisions to its greenhouse gas ambitions next month in the MEPC 80, what are the barriers that are stopping you from ordering zero carbon ships today? Sveinung, let's start with you.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation to be here. Well, first of all, from our side, Angelicoussis Group, we do spend a lot of time, money, and resources to look at the alternative fuels for the maritime industry. Our conclusion, which we have shown by ordering dual fuel LNG, VLCCs, and Suezmaxes, is that LNG is the best solution there today. It's safe, it works, it's available, and actually prices are now lower than VLSFO. So what more can you ask for? Emissions, if you compare our new dual-fuel VLCCs, their energy consumption and CO2 emissions with a 10-year-old conventionally fueled VLCC, our emissions are 40% less. 40. If that's not an improvement, I don't know what is, and it's there today. So when it comes to alternative fuels, yes, we do believe that there are alternative fuels, and maybe for the time being, ammonia looks to be a good solution, but it needs to be green ammonia. And there's a lot of projects, and we are very positive that they will come, but they're not available today. So we see quite a few people ordering what's defined or called ammonia-ready vessels. But what are they going to burn? They're going to burn oil. Is that a good solution? No, we don't think so. We believe LNG is a much better solution. So we will order vessels that can burn alternative fuels when the fuels show us that in the close horizon they will be available where we need them. Our fleet is a tramping fleet. We don't go from A to B. We need to know that when we need bunkers, we can get them in a safe, efficient, and cost-efficient manner. So the first step to that, of course, is to make sure that ammonia, for example, is safe. We don't know that today. We have never used ammonia in an engine room as of yet. Can that be done? Yes, I believe it can be done. But we need to do the work, and we need to build the systems, and we need to do all the tests to make sure that it works. So, long-winded answer, for us, LNG is the best solution, and we will continue to order LNG fuel vessels also into the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Sveinung. And I think that's a great start because it is really a case of you've already started making commitments on this transition and this journey, and then it's a people, process, technology type of sort of wait and see. I did have somebody say to me the other day that their driveway was Ferrari ready, like some ships are ammonia ready. It will never see a Ferrari. But George, over to you as far as the TMS group is concerned and some of those barriers that you're seeing really for you to be able to really embark on this transition.
Well, I agree with all the comments made previously about LNG being the obvious and the only, for the time being, solution until the others settle and we have visibility as to availability and so on and so forth. We have chosen a very different path, as people know. I mean, we are in the dry bulk business and the tanker and the LNG. The LNG is they do burn LNG anyway. The others, we are in the spot market, and most of our ships on the tankers is mostly smaller ships. We only have 55 VLs out of 5 VLs, sorry, out of 52 vessels we have in the water, and we've ordered some 9 tankers, which is LR2s and Suezmaxes. On the dry bulk, and I'll revert back on the fuels. On the dry bulk, again, predominantly we have Capesize and Newcastlemaxes. Out of the 70 ships, half of them are that, and the rest are Kamsarmaxes and Panamaxes. We've opted to go with conventional fuels and with scrubbers and all the bells and whistles with the shaft generators and so on and so forth. But we didn't take the decision to do LNG because for 2 reasons. One is that there are smaller ships on the tanker side. We don't have any new building VLCCs, which would make more sense in that the cost is about, call it $15–16 million more. So it's a bit smaller percentage of the purchase price versus an Aframax. And we didn't do so on the dry cargo vessels we have ordered, which are mostly smaller ships with 4 or 8 Cape-sized vessels. And I think, we're doing still the traditional thing. We're putting scrubbers, heavy fuel oil. Our horizon has always been 5 to 7 years. So we have time to reverse our decision if we think there's a purpose to go to different vessels. But for now, we're happy with the decision we've taken.
Thanks so much, George. No, really great perspective. Gary, over to you from Eagle Bulk perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Andy, and appreciate the opportunity to be here. So we're a little different in that we're exclusively in the mid-sized dry bulk segment, and we're tramp shippers, so that we don't know where our ships are going. Last year, we called on almost 400 different ports. And so when you combine the size of the vessel with that uncertainty, LNG is not even an option. So our approach at the moment is to focus on ships that are modern, but won't have what we think is a significant tail risk of ordering a conventional powered ship that'll deliver, say, 3 years from now, and then only be 40% through its economic life in 2035 with a lot of uncertainty. So we bought 33 vessels, mostly averaging around 2015 built, with the idea that they'll be 80% through 2035. And then the second part of that approach is to be a good steward of capital, right? To be in a position, we can't be first movers. I like to say we're going to be fast followers. And when the opportunity comes, when there's a solution that, again, fuel supply chain, being able to be sure that we're going to be able to get fuel on our vessels, that zero emission fuel in the future, when we're able to do that, we're going to be able to raise the capital to go ahead and commit to that new building. So I think that's an important aspect to it as well, and that is to, be clear about what our strategy is, execute on it, and then when we have another strategy, and I'll just say, I think we were clear on that when we made a very contrarian bet to put scrubbers, or I use the term bet, I try not to, but when we made a decision to put scrubbers on our vessels on the mid-sized fleet, right, and we were clear about it, we carried through on it. So I think, doing that type of thing is really important because at some point, the investment required for this will be quite significant, and being able to attract that capital is going to be, critical to the success.
Fabulous, thanks, Gary. Carl-Johan, how about yourself? I know it's a bit unfair because it's 2 months in now, but how are you seeing it from the MYK perspective?
Well, Thank you, Andy. If your question was, what's the barrier for us to order zero-emission ships, sort of just reflecting on that, I think there are a couple. So first of all, at the beginning of this seminar this morning, I would have probably said technology, but everybody in the morning said that that's not the case. And if I can have my own stories, previous to this job, I was with the Swedish company Stena. We converted the first vessel to be run on methanol 9 years ago. So it's not as though technology is not there. Why didn't it work? Whether it's gray or blue or green, well, it was 3 to 4 times more expensive than MGO. I mean, it's not more complicated than so. So I would argue that, no, this is not a hard-to-abate industry. It's getting somebody to pay for it. And so I think really the second hurdle is the customer base. The cargo owners haven't been ready to pay for this because we operate in a almost perfectly working global market. And then up until today, I think something that we really haven't discussed is that at least those of us who are exposed to the liner business, I mean, we've made a copious amount of money the last 24 months. However, before then, many of us have not made money for a very, very long time. And I think that has to be weighed in there again, that when you're in a management meeting or a boardroom and you're really struggling to survive, the conversation is framed in a slightly different way. Now, there is money in the system. And to answer your question, so I'm very proud now to work for NYK since 2 months back. So we have just ordered the first tugboat that will be delivered with a 4-stroke engine in 2024 that will be run 100% on ammonia. And if that wasn't enough, the first tanker will be delivered year 2026, 100% run on ammonia. So it can be debated if that can be done or not, but I must say that representing a non-European company and seeing the research capabilities that are out in Asia, and when our Asian friends sort of set their mind to it, I'm actually quite optimistic. And so to answer your question, yes, they already have been ordered.
Fabulous. What a great response. Lars, no pressure. What are the barriers that you're seeing to zero-emission vessels?
I already regret sitting at the end of the panel because there's been so many good points made already. But speaking on behalf of Frontline, yes, we have a responsibility towards the environment, but we also have a responsibility towards our investors. And I think kind of the last point that was made is a big point. It has to be economically feasible. And I think kind of the last year's volatility we've seen, in particular on LNG, has kind of made that calculation a bit more difficult to make kind of forward. I also would like to say that as an industry as a whole, shipping has actually done quite a lot the last 10-15 years. For Frontline, we have one of the most modern fleets running in the market, so we have actually done our fair share as well. And we are obviously exploring all the opportunities that are out there, but we run deep ocean-going vessels. There's both a logistical element to it, it's an efficiency element to it, and it's a price risk element to it. So zero emission, I think, is a bit out there for us, at least. We like to call ourselves late adapters, but we support the technology race.
Thanks very much indeed. So we've got late adopters, what was it, fast followers, Gary, I think, wasn't it? No, fantastic. Right, so moving on, I think, clearly we can look at people, process and technology, but as well as the IMO in terms of some of the regulation that they're introducing, we're also seeing other instruments that are now coming into the industry, especially around EU, for example, and the emissions trading scheme, Fit for 55, etc. How do you think that is now going to impact your companies? Also the industry, your clients, and do you think it's going to be the IMO, or do you think it's going to be some of these other more regional initiatives that will actually be the leader of change? So Lars, let's start with you this time.
Again, yeah. I kind of the most kind of present challenge that we face is obviously the EU ETS. But the tanker fleet, at least, or the shipping in general, has been extremely adaptable with regards to eco zones, with other kind of ballast water treatment, all kind of challenges or improvements that the regulators have thrown at us. We've been extremely adaptable, and I think kind of the EU ETS will be solved as well. I think it's somewhat frustrating for owners, of course, because we're not really in the room when the regulatory, the regulatory framework is being made up. It's, in some instances you are, others you're not. So you could say that it's kind of weird that we're sitting here in 2023 and we don't really have the full picture on how EU ETS, which is going to start next year, is going to be executed. But we'll adapt. But I think kind of that would be my answer. That's the first one we're facing at least.
Yeah, and we will have to adapt. George, what about your view on this one as far as the emissions trading schemes and those sort of changes between you and your clients' relationships?
Well, I think one thing that the ship owners, as different bodies, have not really had their say was in when the regulations are being made. And I'll take another example, which probably you're not going to address, which is the CII. That should have never happened. Now we're talking about abandoning it, revising it. Well, how about scrapping it? I mean, that should be the way to do it. Now, whether the people who have spent all this time would be willing to say, yes, okay, we're going to scrap it, I doubt it. But I think one of the things that we need to be involved in, it's not easy as bodies, whether it's the UGS or the respective bodies of other organizations, is to be proactive, which we haven't been. Now, with regard to ETS, obviously we'll adapt. And we try to make our vessels, all the ones we're ordering now, to be as efficient as possible.
Fantastic, thanks, George. So it's the efficiency drive again in terms of a new construction and your existing fleets. Gary, how about your view?
Yeah, so as a Tramp operator, we solve for TCE, and so trading to the EU under ETS, we'll do that. And I think it'll be an efficient market. It'll adjust just like it did for something like IMO 2020. We've done some biofuel trials, which are going to come in, well for us because most of our peers in the midsize haven't. And biofuels, I think, will play an important part, when trading in the EU, alongside with obviously, of course, having efficient ships and doing things that make it less onerous. So it clearly, I think everyone would prefer a global, market-based measure, but we're not there. So it's going to start with the EU. And as Lars said, I think, the industry has a good track record of being adaptable. And you mentioned Ecos. I remember people saying, we're going to have hundreds of ships lining up waiting for fuel. And it didn't happen, right? And the same with availability of the OSFO. It doesn't mean there aren't speed bumps and things like that, but I think the industry is quite adaptable. And, we'll take this one as well.
Very good. Thanks, Gary. Carl-Johan, from your perspective, I think in terms of the reporting side of things as well, and maybe some of the difficulties around that.
There. Okay. So, well, I'm from the land of Greta Thunberg, and of course, I think our largest challenge is that as an industry we emit 1 billion tons of CO2, and when we see statistics for 2022, that's probably a number that's increasing. So I actually see EU ETS as something very positive. We would have loved that this would have been an IMO measure. Just reflect on, we just spoke about taking out sulfur. We've taken out, 75% of sulfur 7 years ago, and we didn't even notice it. I mean, it's a huge win when our industry can act as one. However, all the good things we've spoken about the whole morning, I mean, we are proof of the fact that without legislation, this is not moving. And therefore, I think in lieu of IMO, I mean, this is the second best part. So that's me as a Swede. I represent NYK. And of course, from a Japanese point of view, I think we're less than thrilled that one portion of the world, relatively arbitrary, sets a levy and then takes out 50% of that for the routes. And I think that goes with the fact that sort of we need to get the IMO working, because otherwise I think the other parts of the world are actually going to find this quite frustrating. But I think I think it's going to have real impact for the first time. I think we're having some very good conversations with our customers in the sense that ultimately the cargo owner has to pay at least a portion or hopefully a majority of this, and therefore having this significant public debate before it's enacted. It worked very well when we introduced the SECAs and the low sulfur fuel, and therefore this preparatory period is very good for us. we're relatively slow to adapt, and I think particularly when we come to liner systems, you will actually see shifts in cargo and how that is operated, simply because we react very strongly to economic stimuli.
Thanks very much indeed, Carl-Johan. Sveinung.
Yes, thank you. I think that when it comes to these regulations, my answer is just get on with it, because it's not going to change. It's there, and we have to deal with it. We might or might not agree with how things have been put in place, but I think that's a responsibility the industry needs to put on its own shoulders. So when it comes to the CII regulation, that obviously has only one objective, and that is to take the least efficient vessels out of the fleet. This, of course, this legislation is quite complicated. Requires companies to do a lot of work and follow their vessels extremely closely. We do that. We have all the systems in place. We have 142 ships on the vessels on the water, and we know exactly at each given day what the CII rating is for each ship. A lot of people don't do that. They will be surprised, because the market, in my view, has already, in certain segments, have split into different levels, commercially speaking. And charterers today have to know exactly what the rating of each vessel is before they will charter it. So this is happening. And when it comes to the EU ETS, once again, I just want to correct, I think Carl-Johan said, hope the charterers will pay. The charterer are going to pay for this. We are not going to pay for this. We don't own the cargo. So let's just be clear on that. The other thing, of course, is that legislation will, once again, make the difference between the most efficient and the least efficient ships. So if you take the number I mentioned earlier, a Suezmax which emits 40% less CO2 than the competitor, well, obviously the charterer will choose my ship because it's going to pay 40% less tax. So that's the whole purpose of this legislation, is to make vessels more efficient and less polluting. Thank you.
Thanks, Sveinung. So your mentality is just get in front of it and actually sort of run with the process as quick as you possibly can. No,
Absolutely.
Andy, can I
please do, Gary. Yeah.
So, in general, I agree. I like your approach. You know, you got to put the ball in play, right? I don't think there's ever been a regulation where like this is perfect. Let's go, right? It doesn't happen. But CII has certain real challenges that are you know, specific. As an example, you know, we carry a lot of cargo to and from developing nations. You get penalized for time in port. So if I want to improve my ship's rating, I can just trade between US and EU, and now that critical cargo, you know, whether it's grain or what have you, or exports from West Africa, won't be carried, or the cost is going to go up. And in addition, you know, you get credit for using pumps to discharge cargo on a tanker under CII. The smaller bulk carriers, which I just mentioned, are penalized, don't get that credit, which doesn't, in my mind, doesn't seem to make sense. You know, and so there are things. And then if you went empty back from Asia to the Gulf, you'd have a better rating than carrying cargo in both directions, because typically it takes a long time to load. So I just think in general, I agree with you, but there are certain, CII is unique. And I think it's important that we make there are things and a lot's underfoot to improve it so that it's equitable across the landscape.
And brings in that pragmatism around trading, as opposed to just a reporting mechanism. So absolutely. So Gary, staying with you, I think, you know, a couple of weeks back we saw, you know, major news around Eagle Bulk in terms of your refinancing, which you said at the moment, you know, at the time gave you a massive amount of sort of liquidity. I mean, would you consider it now the right time for ship owners to look at refinancing, or was it just a case of that it was the right place at the right time?
Well, it was the right time for us. You know, The catalyst was, someone mentioned earlier, right, that, balance sheets are strong. We bought 4 Ultramaxes in the latter part of last year and early this year, a little over $100 million, and we paid cash for them. And we don't typically, use cash 100%. And so when we looked at it, we had an accordion feature under our financing, but, when you do financing, it's like, 5 years, that's forever. And all of a sudden you realize, well, 3 years to go, and 1 year, you got to do it a year before. So we just took the opportunity to extend as well as upsize, and it was the right thing. We're very fortunate. We get really good support from our banks. We traditional lending and slightly improved margin, and I think that's on the back of there's a real I think a good delineation now between corporates, if you will, and recourse and transparency and things like that. So it was, I'm not going to say it's the right time for everyone. It was the right thing at the right time for ourselves.
Super, thanks, Gary. So Carl-Johan, as we were saying earlier, I think, you've been now with NYK for a couple of months, new perspectives, as you said, different nuances, I think, because of the ownership, et cetera, and the geography. So what challenges and opportunities do you see from an NYK perspective over the next year?
So thanks. Can I just, before I answer that, I need to help Sveinung out here on his LNG stuff. So LNG is difficult. So NYK also does LNG in many different forms. 5 years ago, it was sustainable from an EU taxonomy point of view. 3.5 years, it was not sustainable, and now it's sustainable again. So trying to explain to my superiors what is EU policy is not that simple. But what we can do today, so we are now loading car carriers based on LNG, fully LNG fueled. That, by the way, cargo owners are paying for. And it's just interesting. Just today, we can now verify that we're loading at a 40% reduction in CO2 emissions compared to conventional fuel. So if we're worried about here and now today, I was sort of, we're there. Because it's really about what we do, sort of the good of today cannot be the enemy of the ultimate good. Well, just then getting back to your question on NYK, I've only been there 2 months. So let's just try this one out. I've lived in Japan and Korea for 25 years, and I just totally struck by how different culturally we are across the world. We try to explain to each other that we're all the same, but it's really interesting that we structurally organize ourselves so differently. And evidently, there are many roads to success, and many different roads sort of lead to Rome, which I find intellectually super interesting. And being in Norway like this, I think an element of humbleness to study actually what successful companies outside Europe are doing would do Europe and Scandinavia a lot of good. What's striking is the enormous capability. So NYK, I would argue, is not only a shipping company, it's really it's a proponent for the Japanese maritime cluster. So the breadth and depth of capabilities is quite incredible. Not the quickest people to move. On the other hand, we are very fond of having 5-year plans, and other Asian countries are as well. So the latest NYK 5-year plan is labeled, I just have to read it, a passion for societal well-being. Now, that gives me a lot of hope, because if anybody had said that 2 or 3 years ago, you would have been at a different conference. But the fact that a very broad technical base is shifting towards societal well-being, truly understanding in my view, its role in society. And you can do that if you're a company from 1860 something. And therefore, I think it is quite phenomenal that sort of we are a global industry, but we actually need to learn from each other. And we've been talking about relationships and networks the whole day, and that's why I think many of us are here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm still tickled by that, but I've just got to compose myself. Right, Sveinung. So you made an announcement that you were looking at a partnership with Chevron around ammonia. Can you share with us a little bit more about what you're hoping to get out of that? And is it on the fuel side? Is it on the trade side, etc.? And what's the direction of travel for that investigation?
Yes. Well, first of all, Chevron is one of the most important customers of Angelicoussis Group. We do a lot of business, especially on tankers and LNGs. So Chevron is looking at major projects around the world to produce and export ammonia. And as a ship owner, what we do, we design, we supervise, and we build and operate ships. So we are looking at this together with Chevron to come up with a new design for large size ammonia carriers. So our role is purely on the ship owning side. And hopefully we will also come to the conclusions that we can use ammonia as the fuel for the vessels. That is also part of the scope. And then we'll see where we take it from there. So it's very exciting. We are very pleased with the cooperation we have with Chevron, and this is part of the overall cooperation that we have with them as a group.
Super. Thank you for sharing that. No, thank you very much indeed. George, I think it was back in January I saw that you had 25 ships on order or something impressive anyway. I mean, massively impressive. Majority in China of your bulkers and tankers, etc. And then I think from your perspective, I mean, is China becoming now the go-to as far as, ship owners are concerned? And what are some of the advantages, disadvantages that you see within the current order book?
Well, first of all, we have 20 bulk carriers and 9 tankers, all to be constructed in China. Many reasons. Japanese yards are very expensive. Koreans don't construct bulk carriers. They construct tankers, and much more expensive. We have a long experience having contracted our first ships in China in 2003. And provided you have a good supervision team and you order with top-notch yards, you will not have an inferior vessel as compared to the Korean or Japanese. I think on the conventional ships, it's fine, provided your supervision teams are good. And we have the experience, so we don't feel that we're penalized. It's a perception issue, but I think more and more people come to realize that Chinese, provided you construct at the right yard with the right supervision, are not bad.
Fabulous. Thank you, George. So I think just moving on a little bit, I think, to green corridors, and basically, do you see them, and I think it's a question for everybody, and we'll go down the panel, as a way to kickstart green investment? And, for specific types of ships and specific types of trades, are you involved in any, or what would it take to become involved in them? Lars, let's kick off with yourself.
Well, I think I'm the wrong person to start on the green corridors, so thank you very much for that pass.
Carl-Johan.
From an ANYK point of view, we are looking at them both into Europe and car carriers, and we're looking on the bulk side from South America back to Asia. I think in the previous panel it was discussed. I think it's very important that the rich part of the world pays. So electrical ferries in Norway, I think, is great. Norway, I think, has $82,000 in GDP per capita. And again, from COP26, if rich people don't pay, nothing will happen. And therefore, finding corridors, I think, in Europe, domestically in Norway, coming from Stena, ferries within the Irish Sea or in the North Sea, I think would be very natural next steps, because this pie is too big to take in one bite. And therefore, I think this notion is a phenomenal way to build some enthusiasm and to see that it actually works. On the other hand, with it needs to come government support. And if you think it's difficult to do this in the IMO with, what did we say, 176 members, well, domestically UK or domestically Norway or whatever, Scandinavia, you think should have been done yesterday. And with sufficient support, as we've been talking about the IRA and other things in the US, of course it can be done. And I think it's a phenomenal thing, but as a legislator, don't sit back and wait for the market to fix this. I mean, we need to jumpstart it, and therefore we need to see political leadership, especially in Europe.
Thanks, Carl-Johan. Gary, where's your appetite on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are great initiatives, but again, they lend themselves to vessels that are repeating their trades. I mean, whether it's a liner or you know, a cape, which is constantly going to the same ports. I already mentioned, you know, we're calling hundreds of ports. One of our vessels may call somewhere and not go back for 5 years. So it just doesn't lend itself. But absolutely, you know, anything that will spur investment and give people the confidence to go ahead and be able to order ships because they're going to be able to fuel their ships are things that we need to move this forward. It's all about speed, right? Ultimately, we get there, but it's about speed. And the same reason we need a market-based measure, right, so that people can understand that how they're going to be repaid for that investment or have the potential to be repaid for it.
Thanks, Gary. George?
I think we're not ready to get married now. And because the business model that we have does not cater to green corridors. I mean, we're Tramp operators. We're not willing to enter into long-term business that by definition doesn't give you a high return. If you were to do that, you would need a very long charter so that you know where your residual is at the end of the venture. So I said, we're not ready for that marriage.
So sit and watch, see the technology that comes out of it, and maybe look at adoption for other parts of the shipping industry.
Yeah, absolutely, but not in what we do right now, yes.
Thanks, George. Sveinung?
Yeah, again, same as George just said. I mean, our business, we're in tankers, dry bulk, and LNG. We're in the tramping business. Corridors doesn't work that much for us. But again, as it's already been said, it's a great initiative, and I think a lot of positive development should come out of it. In particular, when it comes to development of infrastructure, the low-carbon fuels we need. You know, as a company, we are completely fuel agnostic. If the fuel works, if it's available, if it's priced correctly, we will use it. So I think all of these initiatives are good. I guess for the green corridors, at the moment they are, you know, very regionally based, and it doesn't really fit to our business model. But hopefully, they will lead to something positive over time.
So it's fine. Just coming back to the first point I think you made around digitalization and I'm going to say transparency, and really around, I'm going to say, energy optimization. What sort of things are you looking at as a company there in terms of, you know, fleet installation of energy-saving devices, technologies, etc.?
Well, for energy-saving devices, I think the first thing I have to mention is that we should not forget the existing fleet. The existing fleet transports 85% of world goods today, and it needs to be there. People need to understand that the energy transition is a transition. It's not a switch. It's not going to be green tomorrow. It's going to be green at some point in time in the future. So we spend a lot of time. We have an energy efficiency department that tracks all our vessels. And you'll be surprised that if you make sure that the hulls of our tankers or our bulkers are never fouled, you will reduce your energy consumption with 10 to 15%. And the same for the propeller, 5%. So you need to track this. So we do this with digitalization and make sure that all the vessels at any given point in time, we know exactly how they perform, because that will tell you if performance is deteriorating. So that's for the existing fleet. For new builds, we always put on the most efficient, latest technological solutions, such as shaft generators, such as ALS on the LNG carriers. And going forward, we are also looking at potentially carbon capture on board for LNG carriers. That could be of interest because you have access to cryogenic systems on board. So anyway, we always try to improve the existing fleet. We always try to improve when we build new to make the vessel the most efficient vessel that is available in the market. Thank you.
Fantastic, Sveinung, and we're out of time, but I mean that's a nice one to finish on. That certainly we can't build today's ships with tomorrow's fuels because of the power density issues that we're going to face with future fuels. So whatever we can do, and I know every one of you is looking at the energy saving devices, energy efficiencies of existing fleets. But with that, I would like you to join me by saying a huge thank you to our panelists for a wonderful session.